athletes go to the Olympics for various reasons. If you're a professional basketball player, there's no reason LeBron James should be playing in the Olympics. There's no reason Dwayne Wade, who has brought this up, should be playing in the Olympics. They're not getting paid for it, but they represent their country. Number two, why do you get the Olympics? Well, it makes people feel good about the athletes representing their country. Now, I don't know how many of you caught this a few weeks ago, but the NBA obviously is in the middle of its playoff run. Dwayne Wade plays with the Miami Heat. He's kind of banged up and injured. And he brought up the fact that maybe he shouldn't be competing in the Olympics because of his health, and he's not getting paid. So maybe they should pay him. Of course, he's not going to get paid in the Olympics. I have a friend who some of you might have heard of, a guy by the name of Mark Cuban, who's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks, who does not want to send his athletes, his basketball players, to compete in the Olympics because he runs a business called the Dallas Mavericks. And he does not want his star players injured in what he feels is a 2-week waste of time tournament. So you have athletes on one hand saying, I want to compete for my country, and yet you have business reasons for them not to compete for the country or to compete for the country. So the athletes, while you watch them because they're the star of the show, they're really not the star of the show. It's the people who bring you the show that's the star of the show. In the United States, you only watch a slither of the Olympics. The other reason you get the Olympics, to improve your country's infrastructure, which I talked about. How is in Sydney? Do they have to improve too much in Sydney, Australia? Or do they have the infrastructure in place? People, what? Half and half, so a lot of it was in place. That's what you have to do now, because like I said in Budapest, $28.3 billion for the 2012 Olympics. That's what it would have cost Hungary to host the Olympics. And there's no way you get your return back on it. There's some slight buildup in terms of tourism afterwards. Slight, but it goes away rather quickly. It doesn't stay. The infrastructure, of course, is used by locals. But, of course, I always say, if you need the infrastructure, why not build it anyway? Why build it for the Olympics? But businesses like having the Olympics in town. So Tony Blair in 2012 and 2005 bids for the London Games and sets the precedent. If you want the games, you better send Tony Blair. You better send Vladimir Putin. You better send Barack Obama. You better send President Lula. The 2016 games go to Rio de Janeiro. The 2018 Winter Games, they'll be in Korea. The 2020 games are going to be bid upon next year. And right now, it's the usual suspects that are involved in it. Tokyo again, Madrid again. And a new country on the international scene as far as the Olympics, Turkey. Turkey wants to get the 2020 games. They want it because they feel that, well, it's a chance to show us off. It's a chance for us to show the world Turkey means business. The Olympics mean business now. If you host the Olympics, you're telling other countries, we want your business. We want you to take a look at what we're doing. Now, whether or not that works or not, immaterial. They're just showing you, this is us. You're going to see us for the next 2 weeks or 2 weeks. You'll see it in London. You're going to see that a lot, but in London, the businesses are already there. Rio, the businesses are not there, so they feel they have a chance. In Korea, the businesses are there. In Turkey, well, the businesses aren't there. So when you look at the Olympics, and you look at the Olympic Games, is it a sporting event, or is it a chance for countries to open their borders for trade? Any questions? Any comments? Yes? Brazil make it. They may be in debt for the next 150 years, but they're going to make it. I mean, Greece, the Greek meltdown, financial meltdown, was not caused by the Olympics, but part of the Greek problem was the fact that they are so in debt. I think the debt of the Olympics now is 12.3 billion US from the 2004 games. The reason the debt is there is that Greece was so behind on all their projects and had to hurry up their projects to meet Olympic specifications. And they went into overdrive, and going into overdrive, they overspent for the Olympics. And right now, there's a question of how they're going to pay off not only the Olympic debt from 2004, but all the other debt that they have. So, $28.3 billion in Budapest. The New York City people, when I was going back and forth with them, a guy by the name of Jay Kriegel was the point guy that was my point guy that I was going back and forth with. He claimed that a New York City Olympics would cost only $3.3 billion. And he was probably right in just the absolute cost of the games. What was not included in the cost of the games, and what you got to look at all these Olympics, was the infrastructure buildup. The 7 line, which goes from Grand Central Terminal in New York to the end of the Hudson River, which is about a half mile, would have had to be rebuilt. And it cost $1 million per mile to build a subway track in New York. So you're talking about probably $1 million just to do a piece of the line. They were going to do that. And there were other things that were involved, which I'm not going to get into because they never did get the Olympics in New York. But that was the only thing that they really had to do. But there were $7 billion on the table. They had to regenerate a park in Queens and rebuild a pond in Queens and shut down the park and a couple other things. So the $3.3 billion was probably correct just for the games, but they don't include the infrastructure. Budapest included the infrastructure, and it came out to $28.3 billion, all of which would be covered by local taxpayers. Any other